Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us for our Ballots Over Breakfast event. It's really good to see everybody in person. Now that we've got our celebrity, Stephen Wagsback, back from his camera appearance, we can begin the event. But we're really glad to see everybody. It's so exciting to be wading back into events in person. It's good to see everybody and to have some time to network and be with each other. I'm Troy Wayman, the President and CEO of One Acadiana. And as you know, Election Day is coming up on November 13th. It was postponed a little bit, but it's November 13th. Early voting starts October 30th. So I encourage everyone to make sure you get out and vote. As Joe Zanko and I were talking about earlier, if you don't vote, you lose your right to complain. So, and I mean that. If you start complaining and I ask you if you voted and you say no, then I'm not going to listen to you anymore. We make it a priority at One Acadiana to educate people on what's on the ballot, and we perceive ourselves as being purveyors of fact. We don't necessarily always tell you how we think you should vote, but we want to make sure you're informed when you go on the ballot box. We want to make sure you know what a yes vote means and what a no vote means. This is our 6th annual event with the Public Affairs Research Council, so we're really excited about having Stephen here with us, Stephen Procopio with us. We do this to review the proposed constitutional amendment so that, as I said, people can go into the ballot booth informed. It can be daunting and rather confusing sometimes when you look at the language on the ballot. If you're not prepared when you walk in there, I think a lot of times people's knee-jerk reaction is just to vote no or to not vote at all on the constitutional amendments. We obviously are expecting probably pretty low voter turnout this election in November. So it's more important than ever that we get people informed about what's on the ballot. We also want to thank Lobby and Stephen Wagsback, as I mentioned earlier, our celebrity that was on camera and left the radio show this morning to come join us. But Stephen's president and CEO of Lobby, that's the Louisiana Association for Business and Industry. We want to thank him and his team for partnering with us on this event. You know, they're great champions for business. If you're not involved with Lobby, I encourage you to do so, to get involved with them. They're a great organization, and it's been a great pleasure of mine since I've been in Louisiana, getting to know Stephen and work with him. We're grateful for that long-standing relationship that we have. I also want to thank State Representative Bo Boyer for being with us this morning. Bo was with us actually Friday for an announcement on some certified sites that we did in Broussard. So we're always excited to have Bo with us. And Representative Boyer is a great champion for the need for tax reform, and that's really today's main topic. We're proud that he helps represent Acadiana at the state capitol and does a fantastic job there. He and Representative Boyer and a core group of legislators guided constitutional amendments number 1 and number 2 through the legislature this year. And we'd like to take a moment to thank some of his colleagues who were also instrumental in securing passage of the tax reform package. Senate President Paige Cortez, House Speaker Clay Schexnayder, Senate Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Chairman Brett Allain, and House Ways and Means Chairman Stuart Bishop. If you'll notice, there's kind of a connection between all these folks. These folks, majority of them are representatives or do represent us here in Acadiana, so we're very excited about that. Finally, I'd also like to thank Dr. Joseph Abraham. He's board member of the Lafayette Public Library Foundation. I want to thank him for joining us. Dr. Abraham will share a few words on the Lafayette Public Library millage renewal following our discussion on the constitutional amendments. Now, without further ado, let's dive into those constitutional amendments. There are 4 constitutional amendments on the ballot in November. One Acadiana is in support of all 4 of those constitutional amendments. 2 of these amendments in particular, listed as number 1 and number 2 on the ballot, would enable transformational tax reforms that will support more jobs and lower taxes. And that's kind of all you really need to know. More jobs, lower taxes. That's what's important to all of us. So that's, Andre and I were talking earlier, and I told him I've done several events recently, and I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but that's kind of the tagline. No matter what's going on with us right now, we can say more jobs, lower taxes. And so that's what we're sticking with. And first up on today's panel, we'll hear from Stephen Wagsback with Lobby and State Representative Bo Boyer, who will explain the need to vote yes on constitutional amendments number 1 and number 2. And before turning it over to Stephen and Representative Boyer, I want to point out the index cards on your table. As you have questions during the event, please write them down and hand them to one of our staff that you'll see roaming around the room. Just raise it up and we'll spot you and we'll come pick it up from you. We'll have time for audience questions after our speakers have had a chance to present. You also have a folder in front of you with one of Acadiana's ballot guides, which explain our positions on the constitutional amendments and the Lafayette millage renewals and rededication on November 13th ballot. Lobby has also shared helpful materials at your table, including educational toolkits on the constitutional amendments 1 and 2. And for our virtual attendees, you were emailed these materials earlier this morning. And on that note, I will turn things over to Stephen Waguespack and Representative Boyer.
Thank you, Troy. Can y'all hear okay? All right, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I know my colleagues up here do as well. Y'all must be a glutton for punishment if you get up in the morning to go talk constitutional amendments, or the breakfast is good, or you just want to kind of find an excuse to go in late for work, or whatever it is. I'm glad you're here, that's for sure. The way Bo and I and Stephen are going to do it is I'm going to talk a little bit about Amendment 1, and then Representative Boyer is going to come up and talk about Amendment 2, and then the only doctor at the table is going to come up and talk about Amendment 3 and 4. And then after that, we'd love any questions, comments, thoughts that folks have, because, you know, these can be complicated. So I'm not going to get too heavy into a PowerPoint. I'm going to use a couple things, but, you know, I think it's important to understand the context here. If you're like most people, you probably show up to the voting booth and you kind of know who you're voting for, and then you go look at that poster on the wall in the gym, and, oh, there's amendments this year. I'm a no unless they prove me right. That's what most people do, right? That's what I do. That's what my family does. This is one of those years where we hope that you walk in understanding 1 and 2, and you take the time between now and November 13th and educate your friends and family why it's important that they walk in prepared to vote for Amendment 1 and 2. And then Stephen will tell you why 3 and 4 also when you walk in, because it is critical. You know, a couple of years ago, you had the first time we've seen the fully term limited legislature go into the Capitol. People like Representative Boyer walked into that Capitol with new ideas, with an eagerness to try to solve problems, and they started doing that. And you've seen that happen each year. So this year, it's so critical that we get a successful part on the ballot, not just for what it'll do for the tax reform, but also the signal it sends into the Capitol, that if they go and do bold things, the people are ready to step up and support them and give them the air cover they need. And that, all of a sudden, winning becomes contagious in the Capitol. And it's been a long time since we've been able to say that about the state capitol. So we need to start that trend. So with that, let's talk amendment number 1. First, let's talk about what the problem is. Well, the problem is right now, if you're a small business in Louisiana and you have customers in multiple parishes, you are subjected in Louisiana to a very complicated and expensive way to simply pay your taxes. In Louisiana, sales taxes are collected on businesses by 55 different collectors all around the state. Those 55 different collectors can all have their different audit teams, assessment approaches, billing practices, etc. So if you're a small business, and you're just trying to compete in the pandemic economy, and all you're trying to do is make the doors stay open, keep your employees hired, keep serving the community you love, in Louisiana, there's a very complicated and expensive way for you simply to pay the taxes you owe. Other states don't do it this way. And so what amendment number 1 would do is replace that with a new centralized, streamlined approach. It creates a commission of 8 people that will then set the rules and regs that every business can depend on. You want to know how much you owe? Go to the commission. You want to know where to pay? Go to the commission. If you're going to get audited, the commission will audit you for all your exposure instead of having the spider web around the state. This commission will absolutely make us more economically competitive. It will absolutely make it easier for small businesses to stay open and not have to hire an army of CPAs and accountants and lawyers just to be able to pay their taxes. And it puts us simply in line with every other state in the country. Because right now, we are not that place. I'm going to show you a couple of visuals real quick and ignore some of the slides. I don't want to bore you with a full PowerPoint, but I'm going to show you a couple of things. Maybe I will show you a couple of things. Let's come over here. Forget COVID. We're tired of talking about that. Okay, so I'm going to tee up a little bit what Bo's about to say. When we're competing with other states for jobs in the South, We have high income tax rates and a complicated sales tax collection system. We're losing to states like Texas, but everyone knows that. You know, Texas has always been intimidating over the years. It's always been a problem. But Mississippi is also gaining ground on us, and they have the centralized collection we're talking about right now as well as lower income taxes. And so it's one thing to lose to Texas. It's downright embarrassing to lose to Mississippi. And so that should be motivation enough. That should be case closed why you want to vote for these amendments. Keep going a couple more, please. I want to go to a chart. Just keep going. Go back one. This is how small businesses today pay their sales taxes. I want you to think about this. If you are a 1, 2, 3 person shop, you're working the counter, you're working the storeroom, you're sweeping the floors, and you're out going to the bank to get the loan. This is what you have to do in Louisiana. You pay your state sales taxes just to the Department of Revenue. Very easy to do. Your local taxes, you're subjected to over 55 different local collectors. Each one of them have the different army of auditors and assessment levels I mentioned earlier. Very convoluted, very complicated. Sometimes you don't even know who to pay, much less what amount they're expecting. But you'll find out a year later when you get that audit letter in the mail. Then you'll know for sure whether you did it right the year before. You want a ruling to know if you're doing it the right way? You got to go to another entity. You want to appeal it? You got to go to another entity. It's an unnecessary spider web that we put our small businesses through. If this amendment passes, it's replaced with this. All of those different entities go under the same umbrella organization. That is the commission that will have 4 representatives of the state, 4 representative local collectors. Those 8 individuals will then set the new rules and regs for how you pay your taxes. It's absolutely the right way. Businesses will benefit from a lower overhead way to do it. And quite frankly, we think government will benefit also because it'll be more efficient and organized. I think there's probably revenue that could be collected that's not out there. And so I think local collectors and the state will benefit also. So it is absolutely a win-win for everyone involved. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to my partner, Bo, to talk about amendment number 2. And before I bring him up, I want to mention one thing, that in the Capitol, things get tense, emotions run high, debates get hot. There's always bills that get stuck in the ditch. And the question is, will they stay there, or can you find a way to tow them out and keep them moving? And different things are needed at this point in time. So one thing that's being proven in this term limits legislature, when a bill gets stuck in the ditch, you need a legislator that can bring it out, go to a microphone, explain it to people, understand questions, find the compromise approach to get it going. In a short amount of time, Representative Boyer has proven himself to be that type of tow truck that can get those bills out of the ditch and keep them moving. It's a skill set that is sorely needed in the Capitol, and a skill set that he shows each and every day that he's there during session. So I want to thank him for doing that.
Thank you, Stephen. And just to add one more thing that Stephen was saying before we go to amendment number 2 on the Streamlined Sales Tax Commission. Right now, if you're a business operating in all 64 parishes in Louisiana, an out-of-state company doing business in Louisiana in all 64 parishes, you have a single sales tax remittance that you have to do in Louisiana. If you're an in-state business operating in all 54, you have the 55 that Stephen was talking about. We treat out-of-state businesses better than we treat in-state businesses, and that's got to change. And so, again, yes on number 1, but thank you, Stephen. That was a great explanation. So number 1 is sales tax submittal. Constitutional number 2 is dealing with income taxes. It's dealing, when you look at it on the ballot, it's basically saying 2 main things. One, what it's doing is it's setting the maximum income tax, personal income tax rate for Louisiana residents at 4.75%. The second thing it's doing is it's removing the mandatory deduction of federal income taxes that we have in our Constitution. I'm not saying we can't, it's just removing that mandatory portion. So that's what the ballot language says. But in essence, what it is, it's tied to 3 other bills that we passed during the legislature that don't go into effect unless this constitutional amendment number 2 passes. The first one deals with income tax. And what it does is we are removing our personal income tax rates from the Constitution, setting the maximum one at 4.75. But in this companion bill, we're actually setting our income tax rate at 4.25%. All right. So in Louisiana right now, our highest income tax rate is at 6%. So after this passes, the maximum rate will be 4.25%. The other two rates that we have are also going to be reduced. But it's very important to note, right now, we have one of the highest personal income tax rates in the South. After this passes, if we take those states that do have an income tax, we will have the lowest income tax rate in the South and one of the lowest 5 in the country. So to Stephen's point about us not keeping up with Mississippi and not keeping up with Texas, finally we'll be able to keep up. So this is very, very critical that we do this. The other thing we have is we have triggers in place when it passes. As the state starts to receive more personal income tax revenue, as the state gets on solid footing, and as our rainy day fund improves, we have triggers set to continue to lower the personal income tax rates, even in addition to what we're doing now. So if you want to be able to compete with Florida, and again, we don't have Florida's high property tax rates. We don't have Texas's high property tax rates. We have a reasonable property tax rate, and we can bring in some low income tax rates. Will finally be a game changer for people trying to do economic development in the area. So there's 3 legs to the stool. So the first one is personal income tax. Second one is corporate income tax. Right now, when we talked about the complexity that we have in our tax system, we have 5 corporate income tax rates, a 4, a 5, a 6, a 7, and an 8% rate. We're going to bring that down to 3 rates, a 3.5% rate, a 5.5% rate, and a 7.5% rate. So that's the second leg to the stool. Personal income tax, first leg. Second leg is corporate income tax. The third leg is the franchise tax. Now, if any of you business owners out there have been in business for a while and have a decent size business, you're going to realize that you are an outlier when you're looking at other neighboring states that don't have a franchise tax. So we're trying to advertise to bring new business to Louisiana. This franchise tax kills us. What we're doing is we're finally piercing the veil on the franchise tax. We're getting rid of the franchise tax for any business that has a capital value under $300,000. And then what we're doing on those businesses that have a capital value over $300,000, we're lowering it from $3 per $1,000 in capital value to 2.75. And you might say, well, hey, this isn't a big deal. But this has been a sacred cow in Louisiana for years. And for decades, they've tried to get rid of it. This is the first time we're even able to move in that direction. And just like the triggers we had on the personal income tax side, we have the same thing on the corporate side to reduce the franchise tax. So as corporate income tax revenues continue to come in, and as they increase and beat expectations, we have triggers that are going to completely continue to lower that franchise tax. Our idea is that we'd like to get rid of the franchise tax altogether because it makes us a disadvantage when competing with other states. But this is the first step. You know, we've had a long history in Louisiana of not doing things the right way. This is the first step to change in Louisiana. Right now, when you look at our rankings on a national level, we are 42nd when it ranks to how we are with business friendliness around the country compared to other states. We've been in the bottom 10 ever since they started doing the ratings for the different states. This will finally get us out of the bottom 10. Sales tax wise, we're ranked 49th in the country when it comes to our sales tax complexity. That can't work for anyone. You know, it would be nice if, you know, on our unemployment taxes, we're in the top 5, and our property taxes, we're not in the top 20. Overall, our tax burden in Louisiana is about middle of the road as far as how much taxes we pay compared to other states. But our burden of being taxed is at the bottom, and that's something we have to change. Constitutional Amendment number 1 and number 2 will start moving us in that right direction. And look, I'm optimistic. You know, if we can get these passed on November 13th, we are finally telling Louisiana, we're finally telling the rest of the country, hey, we're tired of doing business the way we've always done it. We want to be a pro-business friendly state. We want to do good things for our residents, and this is the first move. When we were campaigning to get into the office, people said, hey, what do you want to do? What's the number one thing you want to do? And the number one thing I wanted to do, and I repeated this every time I had the opportunity, I wanted to be effective. Whatever that meant, I wanted to be effective for the people I represent and wanted to be effective for the state of Louisiana. This is effective change that can move Louisiana forward. And we need you to get out there, tell your coworkers, Tell your neighbors, tell your family, get out there and vote yes for number 1 and number 2. If you got a business and you want Stephen or I to come and, actually, I guess either Stephen. That's right. If you want us to come and talk to your business, to your employees, to a neighborhood watch group, whatever you want, let us know. We'll come out there and visit with them. But right now, I think we turn it over to questions, or is Dr. Stephen coming up next? Dr. Stephen. All right. So look, I'm not a PhD, but I did deliver one of my children in the backyard on the way to the hospital. So I don't know if I get like do I get some kind of a doctor kind of a deal, street cred at least?
Yeah, just a couple words. Let's give a round of applause to Stephen Wagsback. As many of you know, I moved here about 4 years ago from Alabama, and one of the things that I realized that we have in common is that I can still say, well, we're not Mississippi. So that's one of the great things. And the fact that as a state, we make it easier for companies like Amazon and Wayfair to pay their taxes than we do for our local companies like Steins and some of the others is sad. Right now, to give us some information on the pros and cons of Constitution Amendments number 3 and number 4, it's Dr. Stephen Procopio.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm a doctor, but as my niece likes to point out, I'm a doctor, but not the type that helps people. So she keeps me humble. And I'm not a rock star, apparently. Or have you gotten your Screen Actors Guild license? You got to get your card. Yeah, that'd be good. So I want to talk about amendments 3 and 4. I want to take a second first, just a little bit of context. So you have a really effective delegation. This is going to be a low turnout election. It was already going to be a low turnout election, and it's got pushed. There's a mayor's race in New Orleans, so that's going to be a place that has a lot of votes. You know, as an area, basically you also want to try and support your delegation. So I just think this area probably needs to look into very strongly. You know, a lot of work was done on these first 2 amendments. I will say, and not to go into detail like the first 2, that I come up here like for the last 5 years, I've talked about constitutional reform. And in these amendments, this is constitutional reform. You have, getting stuff out of the Constitution, getting rid of deductions, lowering the rates, and centralizing the sales tax collection, which is in our Constitution. So these are things that a lot of organizations have been working on, including PAR. So there's some really good things that are put aside the tax reform that's embodied in there. It's got constitutional. So with that, I'm going to move on to the other 2 amendments, because I think plenty has been said in there. I can answer additional questions and details on those. All right, amendment number 3. So we have these 2 giant amendments, 1 and 2, that are massive tax reform, and then you have relatively smaller amendments in number 3 and 4, unless you live in these areas. So number 3 is allowing districts that were created after 2006 to have a base 5 mills. So every levy district that was created before 2006 has a base of 5 mills. New Orleans is a little different, but they had sort of a base mills they could draw upon. And then there was post-Katrina levy board reform, and they kind of got rid of that. And now you've had actually 8 levy boards that were formed since then. And so this would actually give them the ability to have that base 5 mills. In addition to the 5 mills, they can always go to the people and get additional property tax millages. So this only affects 5 new districts. There were 8 were formed, but 3 others have gotten millages because they were actually a carve out of another district or something like that. So if you're not in one of these districts, it's probably not super relevant to you. You may want to let them decide themselves. For the amendment to work, it has to be voted on statewide, and then each of these districts also has to approve it if they want to be able to have the millage. Now, the big thing is most places are not going to care about this if you're up in Shreveport, but there are actually 2 that are in your area. That is the Iberia Parish Levy, Hurricane and Conservation District, and the Squirrel Run Levy and Drainage District. Now, and the rough amounts we're talking about here are not huge from a statewide scale. The Iberia Parish Levy District is like 2.9 million if they charge the whole 5 mills. And the Squirrel Run Levy and Drainage District is $20,000. So it's really depends on where you are. If you're not in these districts, this is an area, do you want to let local control kind of take place. If you are in these areas, you have to figure out, do I want to have 5 mills? Potentially, we've learned time and time again how important levies are. And so you have to decide that, or is it, no, I want these levy districts to come out and they need to come to the people for each tax that they have, even though everyone else has had sort of a base 5 mills. So that's something I think that each of those levy districts have to figure out for themselves in there. So that's amendment number 3. Really important if you're in those areas, and if outside those areas, you should at least know what's going on. You're not going to get additional tax if you're outside those areas. Number 4, this is sort of a technical inside baseball thing. When there is a shortfall in the state, there's a recession, there's a pandemic, there's any one of a number of reasons why we're not going to make our revenue estimates. And it looks like we're going to have to do a lot of cutting. There's a couple of mechanisms that can go into place first. And one of them is to reach out and cut all of the dedicated funds by up to 5%. The governor can do that with the approval of the legislative committee. And so that's what the current constitution is. You can go up to 5%. And this amendment would just move it to 10%. So it gives a little bit more flexibility. Now, on the flip side, instead of additional flexibility, it also means that these dedications are going to get cut more in these areas. And these dedications were created on purpose to make sure they were protected. So it's really a balance of, do you want more flexibility in the Constitution, or do you want to make sure the things that you're protecting stay mostly protect? So that's a real quick summary of the 2 other amendments. They're not as huge and weighty and massive generational tax reform as the first 2, but if you're affected by those things, it can really make a difference. And so with that, I think we can open up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Stephen. Let's give Stephen a round of applause. We really appreciate Paul's hard work in keeping us informed and educated on what's on the ballot. And if you have any questions for Stephen or for Representative Boyer, please remember to write them down. We've gotten 1 question so far that was submitted at our table. Please write them down, wave it in the air, and we'll pick it up and we'll go to Q&A in just a little bit. I'd now like to welcome our final speaker, Dr. Joseph Abraham, to share details on one of the local initiatives on the ballot, a millage renewal supporting the Lafayette Parish Library System. One Acadiana is supporting this millage renewal, and we're grateful to have Dr. Abraham here to speak to its importance. Dr. Abraham?
Thank you. I believe you guys work with my cousin, Senator Mark Abraham. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm here to talk about, and tell him I said, please. So right now, as many of you know, there is a library millage on the ballot. What many people do not understand is just how critical this upcoming millage is. Currently, and I'm going to not do this exactly in the order that since we don't have our PowerPoint. Currently, the library is operating at a $1.3 million annual deficit. Okay, if the millage fails in November, that will go up to $5.3 million deficit. And we spent 25 years working on a master plan to build out our libraries and to build all these wonderful regional branches. And it didn't make much news because of COVID, but 2 years ago, the Lafayette Parish Library was named the best in the state. We know we have not even completed everything that was planned, and already we're in a crisis where we're having to scale back. Let me give you the financial history very quickly. We have Maine and 8 branches. Okay. In 2008, some of you know that a library millage failed. And right there, we lost $3 million from the annual budget. At that time, the reserves were $22 million. They were not sitting in the bank. There was a misunderstanding about that. These monies were dedicated. They were dedicated to expanding 2 of the libraries, building a Northeast library, doing repairs, and hiring the staff to man the expansions. We lost $3 million. Thereafter, $10 million was taken out to put into drainage projects. After that, there were 2 opportunities to change millages because of changing property values. And together, those cost us another $1 million. And so the result is this 1.3 million that we're losing. We're cutting into the reserves. The reserves at the beginning of the fiscal year are about 9 million. By the end of the year, they'll be 7.7. Obviously, if we go up to a $5.3 million annual deficit, the reserves will be gone. So that millage is coming up. If the millage fails, we are put in a really tough situation because we cannot keep branches open. And so we put together a few scenarios. We wouldn't be the ones deciding, but to give people an idea, here are 3 possibilities. 1, we stop buying all new materials, no new books, no new recordings, no new databases. We close the main library and we close a region. 2, we close 5 regions. 3, we stop buying new materials and we shut down 4 regions. Remember, we spent the past 20, 25 years, we have not completed these. We're still in it. We just got this thing going, and all of a sudden we're in a crisis. You're business people by and large, and so let me talk to this in business terms. Currently, the Lafayette Parish Libraries greet about 2,700 users a day. That's right at 1 million people a year, okay? Every dollar we spend in the library has a $9 return on investment, but that's only in the short run. Because in the long run, well-funded libraries prepare our young people and our adults to compete and to become, to create a strong workforce for us here and to particularly participate in the knowledge economy. I'll come back to that in a second. And it also addresses the digital divide and make sure that all of our young people, not some of them, all of them, are ready to compete in the workforce and help us out. So the final remarks I'll make is that we are a blessed economy here in Lafayette. I don't know if it's still true, but a few years, I used to be very active in the chamber, but when I was in leadership Lafayette, Elliot Stonecipher came down and he argues that we are the only truly diversified economy in the state, which is good. One area drops, another area picks up. But we can see the oil patch declining. We all hope it does well, but it is declining. We know that farming is declining. Manufacturing more and more is being shipped overseas, and even retail is being hit by internet sales and other networks. We are entering a knowledge economy. If we are to compete, if we are to remain relevant, we need knowledge workers. And knowledge workers are lifelong learners, and lifelong learners are lifelong readers. This is not a large millage. If you have a $200,000 home, you will pay less than $2 a month to support the library. You have a $400,000 home, it will be $5. One cookie you can't get at Rev. Okay. Now, if you're really wealthy and you're a high roller and you have one of those $1 million homes, all you multi-millionaires out of it, it's going to cut into your discretionary budget by $14 a month. I don't know how you could buy, but you'll scrape through. We're Americans, we fight through this stuff. This is absolutely essential for our children, for our grandchildren, for the children at risk, and for this region and this city. If we are going to remain competitive, we have got to invest in the knowledge economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abraham. Dr. Abraham is actually an MD, not a PhD, so he is a doctor that helps people.
And you might qualify as a midwife.
So we do have a few questions from our audience about the constitutional amendments. We had a couple of questions first
Not about midwifery.
Not on midwifery, no. Not yet, but if you do have other questions, you can put up your index cards. On amendment number 1, first of all, we had a couple questions about who is on the commission and how the commission is appointed.
Great question. On amendment number 1, if you look at basically 47 states, they all use the Secretary of Revenue to do it. That's what 47 states do. There are 3 states that don't, us, Colorado, and Hawaii. Hawaii, I don't really consider, they're islands, they're not really a state, whatever. But when it comes to us in Colorado, we, a couple of years ago, said, well, let's just do like every other state and let the Secretary of Revenue do it. Local collectors around the state said, hang on, we don't like that. We're open to talking to you, but we don't want to do it that way. So we went into serious negotiations over the last year and a half and came up with a hybrid model. It's an 8-person commission. 4 are appointed by the state, 1 by the governor, 1 by the Secretary of Revenue, 1 by the Speaker of the House, and 1 by the President of the Senate. And then 4 are representative of local government, local collectors. 1 nominee by the School Board Association, 1 nominee by the Sheriff's Association, 1 by the Police Jury Association, and 1 by the Municipal Association. So what that means is you'll have an 8-person commission, equally balanced between state collectors and local collectors. So they will develop a model that works uniquely for Louisiana. The reason why that's a little bit, better here is 2 reasons. 1, look, there's a political dynamic. We wanted the collectors to come on board, and they have come on board. But the second piece is we're a little bit different than other states that our current constitution allows for localities to issue sales tax rates that are unique to their area. That's the constitutional decision made long before. So with that having been said, a commission that represents those local collectors can best reflect a process that is sensitive to that. So we do think it's a good approach. It's going to create a balanced board that everyone can go to and know that when they get advice from that board, it's going to be reflective of what the state needs and the local collectors need.
Thank you. And then the next 2 questions that I'll group together. The first is more general about organized opposition to number 1 and 2. But one kind of point of criticism I've heard is about the local sales tax collection jobs. And so someone asked in particular, what will happen to those jobs and how many are we talking about?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I'll let Bo and Stephen if they want to as well. So the first was on organized opposition. The good news is thus far there hasn't been much. In the legislature, these passed with overwhelming bipartisan majorities. The local collectors and the state collectors both were good with the bill, and so you didn't have it in the legislature. Post-legislature, there hasn't been organized opposition either to rear its head yet. Obviously, we're looking very closely at it. You may have a local collector around the state or so that, in the coffee shop is belly aching about it, but there's no organized opposition there. The only opposition we've seen thus far has been to Amendment 2, and it's from a self-proclaimed left-leaning budget group. And the main part of their criticism is they don't like the fact that the rates are going down. They prefer to see the rates go up. Well, that's their perspective. I don't think that's reflective of where most of the Louisiana citizens are. So you don't have a really firm opposition on it. The second is the criticism of local jobs. Okay, so local collectors right now, if you're a local collector, you have created an enterprise to go out and do these collections and do these audits. This enterprise every year justifies its existence by targeting businesses in this region. If you just think about that, that is a very bad way to create economic growth in your parish or your area. And that's why it's been so harmful. Now, the good news is that this commission being formed, they're not designed to create their own department or agency or whatever. They are going to have to lean on the local boots on the ground to implement the streamlined rules and regs they put in place. So I think many of those folks will still have a role. They will just be under the guidance of the new centralized commission, not the spider web that we've seen thus far. So that's the good news. The second news is, I'm a realist, like I bet many of you all are. And my guess is local government's a whole lot better at reassigning folks than letting folks go when it comes down to it. So I think you'll see if there is a need for some efficiencies, hopefully that goes back to the taxpayer, but if not, I think you'll see a reassignment of duties. But remember, this commission to develop these new rules and regs, they're not an agency. They're not an enterprise. We're not creating a fiefdom. We're creating an entity to develop rules and regs and a process. They will still continue to lean on the local boots on the ground to implement this policy.
Let me add just one other thing on what Stephen was saying. So this was a big part of negotiations as we went through it. Our local collectors, the Lafayette Parish is your school board. Iberia Parish is your school board. I think St. Martin Parish is the school board as well. They charge a fee to the municipalities that are underneath them. Okay, so Lafayette Parish will charge the Sheriff's Department a fee for the collection of their taxes. That fee is still going to be in place. So Iberia Parish School Board is going to still charge the city of New Iberia that 1%, even though some of these efficiencies are going to come into place, because there's still going to be a role for that local tax collector. Those dollars are going to be coming to the school board, and they're going to have to still disseminate them. They're still going to have some, at least initially, some audit functions and all. So there's not going to be any jobs that just disappear because of it, and the revenue that they generate is still going to be there. Over time, do these efficiencies, warrant a consolidation of employees? They're going to have to make that decision on a local collector basis. But I don't think this legislation definitely does not impair that.
And let me add one more thing when it comes to local jobs. I think it's an important discussion to have because local jobs are important. But let's be frank. For too long, Louisiana has depended on government jobs to be good jobs. And quite frankly, that is a losing scenario in the modern economy. Maybe back in the day when we were some rural outpost, that was one thing. That is not where we are today. And we compete with Texas and Florida and Tennessee. Do you think they sit around and opine for the days where we can just have government jobs securely protected on it? No, they would laugh at this, even having this being part of the discussion. The truth is, our biggest problem is not how do we better protect government jobs in Louisiana. Our biggest problem is when you drive down every main street in this whole state and you see districts that used to be filled with small businesses and local businesses, they're no longer there. Or if they are there, they are scraping by and doing everything they can to survive in, yes, the modern digital economy that you so well mentioned. That is the reality that we face. And so amendment number 1 will allow those local private sector jobs a better chance of surviving. So if you're a voter walking into that ballot and you're worried about local jobs, then you should be even more inclined to vote for amendment number 1, because that's the best chance we have to protect them going forward in the current economy.
Yeah, if I could just add just a little bit more. So unlike amendment number 2, where you have a constitutional amendment and a bunch of other bills trigger it in, that's the reform. It's done and over. Amendment number 1, it gets you over the constitutional hurdle. And it sets up this, commission and then actually does several other things that gets us far down the road. There will still probably need to be additional legislation that helps clarify a lot of the details, because it's a very detailed and complicated process. So we don't know the exact final form yet of what everything's going to be on the audit rules, and that still has to be worked out. But this is by far the biggest hurdle of what has to get done to get centralized sales tax collection.
Last question generally about amendments number 1 and 2. So after all of the hard work that's been put into these 2 amendments, months of work by the legislature and the task force, probably years dating back multiple sessions, and then I know years of work by PAR. I think I've seen reports by PAR dating back more than a decade. What happens if these amendments don't pass? Is there a path forward on tax reform?
No, very simple. I mean, this is Louisiana's path forward. So if we want to move the state forward, we've got to get to the voting booth. We've got to get our friends and business associates. Those 3 legs to the stool that I talked about, personal income tax, corporate income tax, franchise tax. If amendment number 2 does not pass, that stool does not have a seat at the table for our businesses and other people who want to. Louisiana doesn't have a seat at the table. It's done.
I would add to that, as part of my job with LABI, one of the privileges I have is I get to go around the state and visit with business leaders and kind of hear from them and all that. And I would tell you, I get asked a lot, what is the biggest issue facing Louisiana? And people expect that to be a tax or school reform or whatever. In my opinion, it's none of that. Our biggest challenge in Louisiana is the low expectations we have for ourselves. And quite frankly, winning is contagious. And I think last year, the legislature worked to put together some common sense legal reform that I think is good for the state. And I think this year they put forward some proposals that's going to invest in infrastructure using existing dollars and begin our path to tax reform in a very robust way. If all of a sudden these ballots pass and you get 2 years of victory start stacking up, all of a sudden winning gets contagious. And then issues get bolder in the Capitol. And then when solutions come out of that Capitol that are actually bold, I think the people in the state will see that and say, okay, maybe it's time to raise our expectations. Maybe it's time for us to say, okay, let's look in the mirror. We can battle Texas. We can battle Tennessee and Florida. And if we ever want to be the state we truly can be, we got to start raising expectations. and start challenging ourselves to be better than we've been. And so I think it's huge on that front, not just on the tax reform piece. And then the last thing I'll just quickly say on amendment number 4, because I see my healthcare table over there, kind of, listing all this. One thing about amendment number 4 is if you look at our $36 billion budget, whatever the heck it is, a lot of stuff's dedicated. You know what's not dedicated in that budget? Healthcare, higher ed, and public safety. Those are the 3 things that fight for scraps every single year. Now, if you think as a society, those are the 3 things not worth investing in, maybe that's a perspective. I wouldn't agree with it. And so I do think we want to give legislators more flexibility to protect higher ed, healthcare, and public safety every year. Because when you have a deficit right now, the legislature is faced with 2 choices: cut one of those critical programs or come to you for more taxes. Neither one's a good scenario. And so more discretion on the funds is a good way to do it.
Yes,
that's a layup for healthcare.
Nice job. Yeah. So there's really 2 dimensions to it. That's a political question. I will say from a policy standpoint, the policies are not going to change if they're good policies. If we don't get centralized sales tax collection this time, it's not like we need to stop getting it. It needs to happen eventually in this form or another. So PAR is not going to change our recommendations that we think should get done on both this and tax reform. Although I know politically you have to go, it's a lot of work to get us all done. But that's why we pay them the big salaries to go get those things done.
Thank you all very much. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to our CEO, Troy Wayne.
Thanks, Andre. And I want to greatly thank Stephen Wagesback, our relationship with Lobby. Representative Boyer, thank you very much for what you do for us in Baton Rouge. Dr. Procopio, thank you very much for being with us and for the partnership that we have with PAR. Dr. Abraham, we appreciate you being with us this morning and sharing that information on the library tax renewal. 2 of the things that are incredibly important to us as an organization, as a business-led organization, are legal reform and tax reform. And I want to applaud the legislature for tackling both of those issues over the last 2 years. It's been a really, really exciting time. And I agree with you, Stephen. I think that winning is contagious. We want to see more of that. We want to see more winning. I want to thank all of you for being with us today, and all the resources that you have from One Acadiana. Please feel free to share those with others to help educate folks as they go to the voting booth. Keep in mind, the early voting starts tomorrow, and I want to share with you one thing. One Acadiana is a business-led organization, is a regional economic development organization in Lafayette's Chamber of Commerce. We do programming like this, and the other programming that we do for main reason is to enhance the quality of life of our area, to improve the business environment of our area. And both of those things we do to create and preserve jobs. Keep that in mind. Look forward to seeing you at the polls. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you all very much.